I was a small child when the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire.
Wow.
But it caught fire. And Cleveland used to be, it's part of the Rust Belt, if you
Sure.
will. So auto industry was there. And we were, our factories were just dumping, into the Cuyahoga River, which was it would be equivalent to like the Snoqualmie River
Sure.
here. It's a significant river. And it literally caught on fire. I've seen the photos of it. And
Wow.
my father's told me tales of it. Gave Cleveland a black eye and a bad reputation,
Yeah.
back in its day. But that's just one example
Sure.
of how far we've come today, as a result of the requirements that the EPA has put into place, and then also for reliability on NERC side.
The world of energy and the technology shaping it. I'm Josh Tate, and this is Between Two Turbines. Powered by NAES. Mark Gollini, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to start with, you've been at the company for over 20 years, and I wonder what brought you here and what that journey has been like.
Well, I love this question, Josh. What brought me here and what's kept me here is two different things. So my first career was the United States Navy, much like many of folks here at NAES Corporation.
Yeah, my dad was a Navy veteran.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm an electrical engineer by degree.
Same with my dad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's a funny
Cool.
coincidence.
What type of ship did your father serve on?
I'm not sure. He passed when I was a couple years old, so it's been years. But, that's what I know is Navy and electrical engineering. So I think there was some maybe top secret stuff a little bit. But, I guess when he passed, they had to come and take all the devices and,
Wow.
keep it all under wraps. So I'm not sure exactly.
That's cool. That's a great story. I'm sorry your father passed so
No,
young,
that's
though.
okay.
I had joined the Navy as a mechanism to finish my electrical engineering degree. I had started it before joining the Navy. I went into their nuclear power program. Shocking, because that's what so many NAES folks have done. And I was able to finish my EE degree. And I was stationed on aircraft carriers. So I was on the last ship I was on with the USS George Washington. So when my Navy career was winding down around the 12-year point, I had to make a career decision: stay and go for retirement, or get out of the Navy and pursue my dream to be an electrical engineer.
Right.
I chose to get out and pursue my dream. I had been to the Seattle area with the military a couple times, so was always fascinated by Mount Rainier. Of course, I was always here in good weather, so Mount Rainier, the water, and it just
It sucks you in.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
does. It really. Yeah, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio,
Okay.
so not going to Ohio bash, but it's
Sure.
it's flatter, more rolling hills, and it doesn't have the
Right.
beauty that we have here in the Pacific Northwest.
Sure. We're lucky for sure.
Yeah, we really are. Yes. Remind me of that when it starts raining. Every
Yeah.
day. Anyway, so I wanted to move to Seattle. I had spent my whole life on the East Coast, and so I was applying to all kinds of jobs over here in the greater Seattle area and wasn't getting any bites. I found this little mom and pop recruiting company that I cannot remember the name of it, but the person that was co-owner of that company, it was Bob Vandenberg. And so anybody listening probably knows Bob Vandenberg, who ultimately got out of recruiting and has been with us at Mustang Station. I've lost track of where he is currently, but he's a plant manager, been with NAES for a long time. So anyway, I got hooked up with Bob. Bob got me an interview here at NAES Corporation. At that time, North American Energy Services, right? And so I interviewed, was hired, and I started in April of 2002. And I was hired on as a young project engineer, and my first role was working with the CMMS program. So NAES was a very small company at that time. Itochu had just recently purchased it. So I worked in tech services, this what we were called back then, in CMMS, and I did that for several years. And I wanted to be a project manager. That was my goal at that time. So ultimately, I applied myself to figure out what skills did I need to be a project manager. Got promoted to assistant project manager and moved over to plant operations out of technical services, and I managed some really interesting projects in that role. One of them was La Chorrera thermal generating, which is down in Panama, and so I got to go to Panama quite a bit. Anyway, managed several different projects. In time, I was promoted to project manager and then ultimately senior project manager. So I was in plant operations, working with a lot of our clients that we still have today, like Power Plant Management Services, or PPMS, was one of my clients. Tier Energy was one of my clients. So I had some, worked with them. And at the time, Alan Bull, who's now one of our vice presidents of operations, he was on my team. It was me and Alan and Terry Grumbles, who's still with NAES Corporation as well. He's plant manager up at Ferndale. We worked for Rusty Whiteley. Alan left first to go start up the NERC group. And I was seeing the things that Alan was doing on the NERC team, and I was like, that looks really cool. And so I, kept, pestering Alan, like, well, when you're ready for me, I'd be happy to join your team. And the day finally came that he needed a manager, and I interviewed and ultimately got the position. The funny story is I didn't even know what the acronym NERC stood for. That was the very first question that I was asked in my interview, and I got it wrong. So that's my way of saying I don't have a compliance background. But I had, understood operations, and I had leadership. And so anyway, I joined his team. I got educated on what NERC stood for and what reliability compliance is all about. From there, Alan moved on to another role. I moved into the director position. And about 2 years ago, I took over, expanded, my role beyond NERC to now be the director of compliance services, where both NERC and the environmental groups roll into me. So, what I would say, and that is, I just described 24 years in a couple of minutes. NAES Corporation has continued to be a challenging, exciting place to work. That's kept me here. This was a 3-year job that I never left because it's exciting. There's, plenty of opportunity here, and it's not necessarily linear, So if you're willing to move around and do different things, this is a place for you. Yeah,
it's a common thread. Each person I talk to, some of them, Frank had been here, many years since the starting, really, and there's something that really magnetic, I think, about NAES that keeps people here. What do you think that is?
I always describe NAES Corporation as a big little company because it's got that smaller mom and pop shop feel to it, that sense of camaraderie. I've got friends that work for Microsoft, Boeing, Starbucks, and they can't walk into the CEO's office and talk to them.
Sure.
NAES Corporation has grown substantially. We're over $1 billion a year company now. And I think we were operating 14 power plants when I joined North American Energy Services. So as you can see, we've grown quite a bit. And we still have that feel where my boss always has time for me. My boss's boss has time for me. You could walk over to the executive suite and talk to Stan Weeks, over there, or the CFO. People are personal, approachable. We don't have a lot of the bureaucracy here at NAES. We've kept that small feel, even though we're $1 billion company today.
Yeah, definitely. It's a service that not a lot of people can offer. Especially how wide our service offering is. And so, I've experienced that as well, having that access, feeling like what I'm doing can actually affect the business overall. Yes. And so that's been great for me. I think shifting a little bit here, you mentioned NERC. What does it stand for?
The North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
Okay. And why do they matter? How do they affect what we do at NAES?
Yeah. Well, they actually affect quite a bit.
Okay.
So if you, just as an interesting data point, NERC is now a set of regulations that are mandatory that are and enforceable with through penalty. Go back when I joined North American Energy Services in 2002, they were guidelines. It was, the best practices, if you will, right? So they were, as time went on and we started having, more in events that impacted the grid. Like one of the most notable ones was I think it was may have been 2007, the blackout, and you got to watch everybody in Manhattan walking home across the bridge because of the big Northeast power outage.
And what happened there? How did that occur?
Remember I said I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. So an interesting tie. There was a transmission line in the greater Cleveland area that was taken out by a tree that caused a cascading power outage that ultimately took out a significant portion of the Northeast of the United States.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily think a single tree could knock out, the power in miles and miles away in, the biggest city in the country.
Right.
So that kind of makes me think that maybe some of these things, it's good that I move from a guideline to a requirement.
Right.
What was that process like?
So it was, it was interesting because I wasn't overly super close to the NERC regulations at that time. But we had a gentleman here, a director here that was charged with figuring out what this NERC was all going to be about. And that was Doug Medley, who's ultimately retired now. And, Doug kept saying, it's coming. These regulations we're going to have to comply with them. And, it was, to those of us in operations, a little bit of background noise, like, well, they ultimately did.
Right.
It happened and they became enforceable. And so then what we saw was power plant owners and operators having to pivot to, change some of their practices to ensure that they can demonstrate compliance with these regulations.
Yeah.
Alan Bull, who I'd mentioned, is, he then went to work with Doug and was one of the architects for our current NERC compliance program.
Yeah. So. And what was the need that he was seeing? What is it like on the ground for some of these plants? Where do we kind of come in?
So, the need was a little bit twofold. One, you were asking what's the significance of NERC to start with, and that the primary objective is to ensure reliable operations of the bulk electric system. So bulk electric system being anything from generation, transmission, distribution, right? Mm-hmm. So put everybody on a level playing field that was generating and selling power into the grid. The initial set of regulations, and in fact, most of the regulations are still read where you can read it and say, I don't know what I just read, and have to read it another time. Yeah. So it's they read like legal documents, right? Okay. So one of the things that Alan did working with Doug was to take those regulations, we call them standards, the NERC standards, and put them in, in a way, in the layman's terms, in a way that plant owners and operators could read through these and have the requirements clearly outlined so they knew what they had to do to demonstrate compliance with these regulations or standards.
So it's taking these really precise legal requirements and turning them into real actionable steps of how do we make sure we're not getting fined or out of compliance.
Exactly.
I mean, what is exactly the thing that have you experienced a plant come to you that's fallen out of compliance or is going to? What does that look like?
Sure, that type of client, falls definitely in our wheelhouse, right? Where they've tried to manage their NERC compliance program on their own, and as the NERC standards have evolved, they've become broader and broader and more comprehensive, and so an owner or an operator may have one NERC person at their plant, and it's a collateral duty.
Right.
So they can, they come to us, to NAES NERC Services. We've got a team of, over 20 subject matter experts on the team. So we are able to have experts in in all the areas that the NERC standards touch. So they gain access to that bench of knowledge, if you will. So that makes us a good fit for that type of client that has found themselves falling outside of compliance or struggling to maintain compliance. They come to us and ask for our help, and then we're able to leverage our team to support that client.
Yeah. So we're eliminating a lot of risk for them.
Correct.
And explain why it is important for a plant to be giving the output that they say they will.
There's financial penalties, right? So if you're found out of compliance, you'll get slapped with a financial penalty. In the world of NERC, the failure to comply at the highest penalty level could be up to $1 million a day. So the penalties could be substantial.
$1 million a day.
$1 million a day. Yeah.
There are planned outages to make sure that their systems are, there's not too much heat loss. They're up to compliance. They're not negatively impacting the environment. These types of things. $1 million a day sounds like a lot. If they're not staying ahead of this, staying offline for multiple days, longer than you anticipate, this stuff really exponentially can get out of hand.
Absolutely. I think you touched on the second point I was going to make is, there we have penalties, right? Now there are I don't know any case examples right off the top of my head of where they hit maximum penalties, but there have been incidents that have yielded very high NERC penalties. The bigger impact to our clients is the loss of generation, right? So if their unit has to come offline unplanned, they're losing a substantial amount of money per day. That makes the penalty look like small change, right? So that's their real incentive, is to be able to continue to operate their plants safely in accordance with NERC environmental regulations, so they can sell their power, and that's really where they're making their money.
Yeah. To make a small shift, you mentioned environmental compliance as well. Was that similarly just guidelines based, or how has that been? What are the requirements there? What are plants needing to do to make sure they're not out of environmental compliance? So
environmental compliance is the regulations around environmental compliance is much more mature than NERC. So we can look at NERC, the birth of NERC around 2007, right? Okay. But environmental in the EPA has been around a lot longer. I don't know the exact history and timeline of how environmental regulations evolved from from the initial to what they are today. What I can tell you is one of the differences with environmental is they have four. Well, I don't know about four. They're media centric, right? So they have to comply with air requirements. We have to comply with water requirements. We have to comply with waste requirements, right? And again, these requirements are complex, and they're also, in order to be able to operate plants, our owners and developers, they have to get permits and be permitted for air, water, waste. There are a lot of these, there's limitations that are specified in the permits, and that's where the environmental services team comes in, and they are able to read the permit, understand what the requirements are, get those baked into compliance tracking tools like we use GenSuite today, right? So the environmental kind of goes, I'll say it goes hand in hand with NERC. Environmental is making sure that we're operating those plants in a way that is compliant with being a good steward to our environment. NERC is about reliability, right? So, and why I say they go hand in hand is that you'll see there's limitations on a plant, not because of its operational capabilities, but because of what the requirements they have to meet for their permits.
Right. So NERC, if you sum it up, essentially, when we turn on the light switch, that it comes on. That's at the end of the day. Yes. They want to make sure power is where you expect it. There's no blackouts from transmission lines being taken out, that type of thing. And then on the environmental side is not only are we generating the power, but we're not adding, maybe extra carbon or, polluting water source, that type of thing. Does that kind of wrap it up in a concise way?
Yep.
So these things have gotten more complex with time. It sounds like from 2007, NERC started making requirements as opposed to guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
So for the average plant owner or plant manager, these types of things are just too complex for a single person to be able to, maybe they understand conceptually why it's there, how it works, but actually making sure and implementing the changes needed to comply, it becomes difficult. And that's kind of where we're coming in.
Right. And not only does it become difficult because it's a lot for the plant staff who are trying to, operate those facilities, but our teams, our NERC and environmental services teams, they keep they're involved on the leading edge of where these regulations are and standards on the NERC side are being developed, right? So we act then as eyes and ears for our owners to give them a heads up of new things that are coming that are going to impact their ability to operate those plants.
And how many new things come up? Is it every year, every few months, or?
It does feel like it comes in waves,
Okay.
but I would say there's something different every year. On the NERC side, where I see a little bit less of brand new standards, but and a change in the requirements, increasing
Okay.
the requirements. Today, without getting overly into politics, what I see on the environmental side at the moment is maybe a little bit of a rollback of some of
Okay.
the requirements.
Yeah, and from your perspective, I wonder, I think a common criticism with any federal agency is there's too many regulations, there's too much red tape, it's inefficient, just let us do what we need to do. What's your perspective on that? Do you feel like they're overly controlling, or do you feel like it is just a complicated system that these things make sense and they should be required? What's your take?
So with, to sum it up, I'm very interested in history. To sum it up would be to go back in history, look at photos of our major cities, New York, Chicago, right? Back when we just, polluted, we were dumping stuff into our rivers. We were just, bellowing uncontrolled burn into the atmosphere. And you see part of it is, they're old pictures and they're in black and white, but it's very evident of how smoggy and dirty our environment was before the advent of EPA. And then, of course, for NERC, it was these, blackouts, rolling blackouts, issues that we were having before NERC was a player. So to me, while compliance may feel like a burden,
Sure.
it's one that is absolutely worth us, having and continuing to support, because we have clean water today, clean air,
Right.
and we take it for granted because this is the time we were born into,
Yeah.
right? But it wasn't always like this. I was a small child when the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire.
Wow.
But it caught fire, and Cleveland used to be, it's part of the Rust Belt, if you
Sure.
will. So auto industry was there, and we were. Our factories were just dumping, into the Cuyahoga River, which was it would be equivalent to like the Snoqualmie River
Sure.
here. It's a significant river, and it literally caught on fire. I've seen the photos of it, and
Wow.
my father's told me tales of it. Gave Cleveland a black eye and a bad reputation, back in its day. But that's just one example
Sure.
of how far we've come today, as a result of the requirements that the EPA has put into place, and then also for reliability on NERC side.
Yeah, so the alternative really is the pollution. Maybe at the time we didn't understand the implications of it, how much it really was affecting certain people, and just the grid reliability. I mean, in Spain, they had a recent, grid failure. We did have in Texas back, a few years now, that shut down because of the cold. But
Yes.
overall, I mean, we're pretty resilient, aren't we?
We really are. And think about how annoyed you are when power goes out. You're just like, how could this happen? And it's very frustrating. But it's an infrequent event. We assume, like you said, that we're going to walk in a room, flip the light switch, and the lights will be on. Or maybe even more important to us today is that when we pick up our phone, we've got Wi-Fi, that we can get to.
Right.
Yeah, and again, it's we have the this stability and reliability because of organizations like NERC.
Yeah, I think of the highway system in the U.S. The grid, I've heard it said, is even more complex. It's even more interconnected, and it's almost a miracle in a sense, the way that it works. And I think we do take it for granted.
You're
Do
right.
you get a sense of that in your work, that there is we take the ability to turn on a light switch, turn on the tap, have clean water, all those things we take for granted to an extent?
I believe we do. I can speak on my own personal level, right? I was working from home earlier this week, and Comcast sent out a notice that there was going to be, intermittent outages, and I was like, livid, like, what do you mean?
Yeah,
and,
how frustrating is that?
How frustrating is that, right? And I've also been here before we had a backup generator here at the corporate office, and
Right.
we've lost power, and you had to get in your car and go home because
Right.
it was, you weren't able to get any work done. And we just take it like I feel, from my perspective, I won't say take it for granted. It's become the expectation.
Yeah.
The expectation that power
Failure
is
is the exception. Yeah, and you don't realize just how thin that layer is until it fails, like it did recently in Texas. Or my understanding is down there they've strengthened their the stability, that if that were to happen again, that the result would be different.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe we just forget as time goes on why we put certain rules in place, and maybe it's just the human condition to an extent.
So there's a saying that we had when I was in the Navy that ties right into what you're saying, is that for every rule that we didn't understand, there was, there's a story, of someone who did something wrong.
Right.
And you can look at the same way, here, both in compliance as it relates to us as, power generation operators.
Considering where we've come from guidelines to requirements, all these changes that have occurred in the past, even 20 years and beyond, where do you foresee the grid is heading? Do you think, I realize there's some difficulties ahead, getting transmission lines, getting the alternative sources of power, and making it all interconnected, battery storage, all these things. Where do you see our grid, in 10, 20 years or into the future?
Interesting question, because I've wondered that myself, right? What I'm seeing due to the complexity and cost of putting in transmission lines today, I wonder if that's not going to drive us to smaller, more localized power plants. So moving away from these anchor points of the large coal plants, which we've seen, the coal plants phase out.
Right.
The other anchor points would be our large nuclear power plants, right?
Yeah.
A little bit recently of a resurgence and interest in conventional nuclear power.
And the micronuclear and
Right.
data centers, et cetera.
I'm wondering if that's the direction that we see things going, is more localized.
Or distributed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Being a former Navy nuclear operator, I'm fascinated by fusion, and I'm really
Right.
waiting to see what's going to happen with fusion.
Yeah.
And we'll
looks
have it in my
bullish.
lifetime, right?
Yeah, it really does look bullish. I think
Yeah.
they said they could power a city with the volume of a glass of water. Pretty incredible
Pretty
to think.
incredible, right?
Yeah. So, as far as I see it, I think the trajectory looks good.
Yeah.
It looks like, some of these problems we're sort of realizing fully what they are now and how to mitigate them. But I think humans are pretty resilient, and this country's been really resilient to continue progressing. So
I think what I often ponder on and find it fascinating is, in the grand scheme of things, electricity is relatively new.
Very,
right?
yeah.
Because in times that my grandparents can talk about, or maybe my great grandparents,
Sure.
That we didn't have electricity in every
Yeah.
single house, and we've gone from it being a novelty to an absolute essential for
Yeah.
our society. I see us, continuing the trend. Alan, when he spoke with you back a couple of weeks ago. He talked about the electrification of the automotive industry, right?
Right.
So we're seeing more and more demand on and more need for generation, right? So electric cars, data centers, right? So I see that this is an exciting time to be in the industry that we're in, because it's certainly not going to go away. It may change in terms of the format and maybe the how we do what we do, but the need for what we do is going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I see it continuing to grow and evolve, and it's a fun industry to be in.
Right.
But Mark, thanks for your time
thank you.
and expertise, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Great. Thanks, Josh. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.